Coming up today, no breakthrough in the latest round of talks between Korea and Japan on the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. No deal at the National Assembly as the rival parties remain deeply divided over how to redraw Korea's electoral map ahead of next spring's general elections. Plus, the big day is finally here. Over 600,000 students in Korea will take their university entrance exam today. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's 6 a.m. on Thursday, November 12th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. Our top story this morning. Korea and Japan held a 10th round of talks in Seoul on Wednesday, seeking to resolve the issue of Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The talks follow a recent agreement by the leaders of both countries to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. Song Ji-son reports.
After their 10th round of working-level talks on Wednesday, South Korea and Japan said both sides continued their efforts to narrow differences towards reaching an agreement. These are the first talks since the summit earlier this month between President Park Geun-hye and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, when the two leaders agreed to expedite negotiations for a faster resolution. Tokyo claims its legal obligation was settled in a 1965 agreement that normalized relations between the two countries. Seoul rebuts this by arguing the so-called comfort woman issue was not included in that treaty. Seoul's foreign ministry stressed the agreement only mentioned economic cooperation and claims, and what Japan did during the wartime was an illegal act against humanity, especially towards women's rights. Over 200,000 women, most of whom were Korean, were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during and before World War II. And only 47 are alive today. The victims demand Tokyo issues a formal apology and offers compensation, whereas Tokyo tries to evade legal issues by trying to deal with the issue on humanitarian grounds.
The Japanese government must legally apologize and recover our honor. That is what we are fighting for. We are continuing our struggle because Tokyo is denying to admit what they have done.
On when the next talks could be held, the ministry only says at an early date possible by working through diplomatic channels. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Now, another round of bipartisan talks on how to redraw Korea's electoral map ahead of general elections in April came and went on Wednesday with no deal. As a result, no one is overly confident a compromise will be reached before Friday's deadline. Park Ji-won reports.
4 representatives, each from the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, including both party leaders, attempt to reach agreement over the redrawing of constituencies. But Wednesday's talks that continued for 3 hours failed to find a solution.
Wednesday's talks are over. Since we haven't reached an agreement, we will meet again at noon Thursday. Aside from that, we cannot talk about it anymore.
This issue has to be resolved somehow, so we will put our best efforts to come to an agreement.
The legal deadline for submitting the revised constituency plan to Parliament is this Friday, 5 months ahead of the elections in April next year. The ruling Saenuri Party wants to maintain the 300-seat parliament by increasing the number of local constituencies while reducing the current 54 proportional representation seats. The party believes that by reducing the number of proportional representatives, it can make room for more rural constituencies without increasing the number of seats within the National Assembly. But the NPAD opposes the plan, saying it will fixate regionalism in Korean politics. The Liberal Party wants to maintain the number of seats given to proportional representation members, and they want to introduce region-based proportional representation members who are chosen based on the total number of votes each party gets in each region. The Constitutional Court ruled late last year that the constituencies be redrawn to realize a more equal and fair representation of the population in each district. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, high school seniors in Korea are taking one of the most important steps in their lives today as they sit for Suneung, or the university entrance exam. Over 630,000 students are going to be taking the test at more than 1,200 test sites across the country. The exams will begin slightly after 8:30 in the morning, so around 2.5 hours from now, and finish at 5 p.m. To ease the morning rush for test takers, many workers around the country will start work an hour later than usual. Extra buses and subway trains will be running, and even the stock market will open an hour later than normal. Planes at Korea's airports will be grounded for 35 minutes in the afternoon from 1:05 to 1:40 during the listening section of the English language test. Now, in a stunning policy U-turn, it has been confirmed that Germany has decided to send refugees back to the country in which they first entered the European Union. The German Interior Ministry told local media that it has been applying since late October the Dublin regulation, which requires refugees to seek asylum at the first EU member state they arrived in. The move comes only 2 months after Germany had suspended the regulation for Syrian refugees. The ministry did not specify how it will apply the regulation, only to say that it would take decisions on a case-by-case basis and evaluate whether sending refugees back to other EU countries is a realistic possibility. Syrian government forces, backed by Russian airstrikes, have broken a siege imposed by the Islamic State group on a northern military airbase since 2013. Syrian state TV says dozens of IS fighters were killed in the battle near Aleppo, and hundreds of dead extremists were found around the compound. It marks the first major achievement by President Bashar al-Assad's troops since Russia began its air campaign in Syria in late September. Now, IS had besieged the base for more than 2 years. The Syrian government forces inside managed to repel attack after attack, knowing they would be tortured, then probably beheaded if captured alive. Experts say the breakthrough should mean Syrian forces can advance into IS-held areas around Aleppo. Now, China's biggest online shopping day just got even bigger. The country's e-commerce giant Alibaba says its total sales from its Singles Day shopping festival on Wednesday came to $14.3 billion US. This according to preliminary results. Alibaba had already surpassed last year's sales record of $9 billion in just the first 12 hours of the online festival. In all, this year's figure was up nearly 60% from last year. It said of the total value of transactions, 68% were through orders from mobile devices. More than 1,500 Koreans have now joined a local class action lawsuit against Volkswagen for its emission rigging scandal. Volkswagen isn't the only imported auto brand that is struggling, though. BMW is having a rough time for a different reason. Kwon Jang-ho reports.
There are now over 1,500 Volkswagen drivers in Korea that are pursuing lawsuits on the German auto giant for the cheat software in their diesel engines. That number is expected to mushroom in the coming weeks, as Parun, the law firm representing the clients, have said it has received over 6,000 petitions so far. The plaintiffs are each seeking a full refund, plus compensation for losses of at least $26,000 US. Volkswagen is not the only German carmaker in trouble. BMW Korea apologized on Wednesday for 7 of its cars that caught fire in the last 2 months. A spokesperson for the company said they are investigating the matter, but whether the fires are isolated incidents or a technical fault is yet to be determined. These issues are affecting sales of imported cars in Korea. The number of newly registered imported cars fell by almost 15% in October compared to the previous month, with Volkswagen sales being the hardest hit, falling almost 70%. BMW sales have also seen a decline of 10%. Until the recent scandals, imported car sales had been soaring, up almost 23% in 2015 compared to last year. To tackle the falling sales, import car dealers in Korea have recurred to a number of promotions for November. Volkswagen, for instance, is offering 60 months of interest-free split payments on 17 car models, as well as further discounts for cash sales. With the number of lawsuits against Volkswagen expected to grow, a government investigation into the emissions scandal to conclude later this month, and global recalls to begin next year, it remains to be seen if such promotion will be able to counter the ongoing negative publicity of the German automaker. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now to a worrying new report that shows the number of debt-ridden companies in Korea is at a high not seen since the height of the global financial crisis in 2009. Almost 200 firms are expected to undergo corporate restructuring this year alone. Won Jeon has this report.
On Wednesday, Korea's financial watchdog said it has chosen 175 small and mid-sized companies to undergo restructuring this year. This was 50 more than last year. The Financial Supervisory Service attributes the sharp increase to slowing demand both domestic and from abroad, as well as stricter criteria for credit risk assessment. Out of the 175 companies chosen, 70 were given a C rating, which means they're subject to a mandatory debt workout plan. And the remaining 105 received a D rating, meaning it's now impossible to normalize their business. The list also showed that the manufacturing sector suffered the most, with 105 of them making the list.
The manufacturing industry saw an overall slump this year, which puts a lot of damage on other sectors like electronics, machinery, automobiles, and food.
The financial watchdog says local banks have already given about $1.9 billion worth of loans for the indebted firms. They still have to provide another $390 million of allowance to help those companies stay afloat. To speed up the restructuring process, the government asked the United Asset Management Company, Korea's largest buyer of bad debts, to take charge. It will serve as the parent company for private equity funds that will raise funds to help out those troubled companies get back on track. Won Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
A Remembrance Day ceremony was held in the port city of Busan on Wednesday to honor fallen soldiers from the Korean War. There was also a burial ceremony for a British Korean War veteran who had asked to be laid to rest at the UN cemetery. Connie Kim reports.
14 years ago, British Korean War veteran Robert McCotter passed away, and it wasn't until this moment that his last wish was fulfilled to be buried with his fellow soldiers in the soil he fought for. McCotter spent 2 years fighting in the Korean War and always wished to revisit South Korea while he was still alive. Unfortunately, due to ill health, that didn't happen. Even following his death, it has taken some time for him to return. War veterans who died after the end of the Korean War were not permitted to be buried at the UN Memorial Cemetery, but the policy changed this year, allowing McCotter to be buried here.
It's been a long time in coming to get to this situation, and I never thought it would happen. And I can't thank the people who have made it possible enough for the help and the way and the respect in which the people of South Korea.
For other Korean War veterans from UN member nations, the burial ceremony was an opportunity to see a fellow soldier laid to rest. This is where 2,300 soldiers from 11 UN member nations now lie at rest in peace.
It gives you a feeling, it gives you a closure. You know that they are put to rest and they have gone to our Savior up in heaven.
With South Korea holding its first burial ceremony for a British veteran of the Korean War at the UN Memorial Cemetery, the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs expects more Korean War veterans from UN member nations to be laid to rest alongside their comrades here. November 11th is a day World War I ended and serves as a special day, Remembrance Day and Veterans Day for nations around the world, as well as here in the port city of Busan. Some 90 Korean War veterans from UN member nations were invited for the Turn Toward Busan ceremony. At 11 a.m. local time, locals and representatives from 21 UN member nations, including the US, Canada, and Australia, held a minute's silence honoring those soldiers who fell during the conflict. Gratitude and respect were expressed by the Korean War veterans,
citizens and civic groups as they undertook a 3.3-kilometer parade through the port city to remember their efforts and sacrifice in protecting the country. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Busan.
Well, those are the stories we've been following on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out the website arirang.com/news. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.